Have you ever considered that you didn't choose your last few books by accident? You stand in front of your bookshelf, or you scroll through your recently purchased titles, and you notice something you hadn't intended. A pattern. Not just genre, not just author, an atmosphere. 3 novels in a row circling grief. 2 essays about identity. Another historical epic. Another family saga. Another thriller where order is restored by the final page. You didn't plan that. Or perhaps you did, but not consciously. We like to think we choose books the way we choose wine. Preference, mood, curiosity, taste refined over time. But what if the act is less aesthetic and more psychological? What if the books we reach for aren't random expressions of personality, but intelligent adjustments of it? Because reading is rarely neutral. We read when we're tired. We read when we're restless. We read when we're grieving something unnamed. We read when life feels stalled. We read when life feels too loud. And the book we choose in those moments often carries a function. Not always obvious, not always noble, but deeply revealing. This episode isn't about judging your reading habits. It isn't about elevating certain genres or dismissing others. It's about something quieter. It's about asking whether the shelf beside your bed, the one no one curates for social media, might be one of the most honest psychological maps you own. Because the question isn't simply, what do you like to read? The question is, what are you reaching for and why? Let's begin with something we rarely admit. We don't always read for taste. Often, we read for regulation. If we haven't met before, welcome to the channel. I'm Danielle Robinson, and this is Between the Covers with Danielle. This is where we don't just review books. We examine what they're doing to us and why we're drawn to them in the first place. I have spent years reading across genres: literary fiction, psychological thrillers, memoir, philosophy, and more importantly, paying attention to the patterns beneath those choices, not just in myself, but in the wider reading culture. Because books are never just entertainment. They're mirrors, they're rehearsal spaces, they're identity markers. This channel exists for readers who want more than summaries and star ratings. It's for those of us who suspect that our reading life is connected to our interior life and who are curious enough to examine that connection. If that sounds like your kind of conversation, please subscribe. You will find me here every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. and on Spotify and Apple with new episodes on Mondays and Thursdays. And if you find value here, turning on notifications simply means you won't miss the next one. Now, let's return to something most of us don't admit. We don't always read for taste. Often, we read for regulation. We rarely describe books this way. We talk about plot, we talk about craft, we talk about whether a book was good. But far less often do we ask what the book was doing for us. Because reading isn't only aesthetic consumption, it's emotional adjustment. There's a reason romance spikes during periods of loneliness. A reason thrillers feel irresistible when life feels stagnant. A reason fantasy worlds become magnetic when the real one feels overwhelming. This isn't escapism in the trivial sense. It's regulation. Psychologists have long studied what's called mood management. The idea that we select media not randomly, but strategically to shift our internal state. We choose stories that soothe anxiety, discharge frustration, restore hope, or impose order. And books are particularly powerful tools for this. A thriller restores justice. A romance restores connection. A memoir restores perspective. A fantasy restores agency. Even literary fiction, the quieter, more interior kind, can function as containment. It gives language to experiences we haven't yet articulated. And once something is named, it becomes bearable. You may not consciously think, I need emotional stabilization, but you might think, I feel like something absorbing, or I need something light, or I can't handle anything heavy right now. Those phrases are psychological tells. They reveal bandwidth. They reveal depletion. They reveal desire for safety. And here's the important part. There's nothing unserious about this. Comfort reading isn't lesser reading. In many cases, it's the most honest reading we do. Because when we're tired, we don't reach for performance. We reach for relief. And the shelf begins quietly to map our seasons. Not who we say we are, but what we need. There's a particular kind of book that lives on many nightstands. It's usually serious, often non-fiction, occasionally a classic we feel we should have read by now. It sits there like a moral aspiration. We intend to read it, we respect it, we might even post it, but we don't always open it. And when we do, we sometimes close it again. Not because it lacks merit, but because it asks more of us than we can currently give. This is where reading shifts from regulation to identity. Because books aren't only experiences, they're signals. They signal who we believe ourselves to be or who we're becoming. There's the actual self, the one who's tired at 9:30 p.m. and wants narrative certainty. And then there's the aspirational self, the one who imagines rising early to annotate philosophy with disciplined attention. Neither self is fraudulent, but they aren't always aligned. Buying a book can feel virtuous. Engaging with it is something else entirely. We sometimes purchase the future version of ourselves, the focused one, the rigorous one, the one who has time. And when that future version doesn't immediately materialize, we quietly return to what feels manageable. This isn't failure. It's a collision between ambition and bandwidth. There's also something else at play: social signaling. Certain books communicate seriousness. Others communicate taste. Some communicate intellect. Some communicate rebellion. And even if we never admit it, part of us understands that a bookshelf is visible. It's read by others. But the truer shelf, the one that reveals us, is the pattern of what we actually finish, what we reread, what we reach for when no one is watching. The gap between display and desire can tell us something useful, not about discipline, but about honesty. Are we choosing books to reinforce who we already are, or to project who we think we should be? And more gently still, are we allowing our reading life to reflect our real interior state, or are we curating it for performance? That tension isn't trivial, it's deeply human. And it leads us somewhere even more revealing. Because sometimes the most psychologically honest reading choice isn't a new book at all, it's an old one. Some books don't leave, they wait. You move houses, you rearrange shelves, you evolve, and still that particular novel remains within reach. Not because you forgot it, because you didn't. Rereading is rarely about plot. You already know what happens. The twist, the heartbreak, the resolution. There's no suspense to recover. What you're returning to is recognition and sometimes restoration. When we revisit a book we once loved, we're stepping back into the psychological atmosphere of who we were when we first encountered it. The student, the new mother, the woman rebuilding after something ended, the version of you who underlined certain sentences because they felt like oxygen. Books hold context. They remember us at different ages. Nostalgia, in psychological terms, isn't indulgence, it's stabilizing. It reinforces continuity, the sense that the present self is connected to earlier chapters rather than fragmented from them. And in unstable seasons, continuity matters. A familiar narrative demands less cognitive effort. There's no uncertainty to metabolize, no new terrain to navigate. The ending is known. The emotional arc is contained. When energy is low, containment is relief. But the deeper question is this: are you returning to the story or to the self who first needed it? Sometimes we reopen a novel because it still speaks. Sometimes we reopen it because we miss who we were. And that distinction is worth noticing. Because rereading isn't regression, it's integration. It's the past and present versions of you meeting across the same pages and discovering what's changed. And once you recognize that, you begin to see that not all reading choices are protective. Some are deliberately uncomfortable. Some are chosen not for safety, but for stretch. Not all reading is regulation. Sometimes we do the opposite. Sometimes we choose difficulty on purpose. A dense biography, a novel that refuses resolution, a political text that unsettles rather than reassures, a book that exposes something we'd rather not examine. These aren't comfort reads. They're expansion reads. And expansion requires energy. Psychologically, there's a difference between restoring equilibrium and stretching capacity. One stabilizes the self, the other enlarges it. When we choose challenging books, we're often signaling readiness. Readiness to sit in ambiguity, readiness to tolerate complexity, readiness to let our certainties be rearranged. This isn't moral superiority, it's timing. You can't metabolize intellectual friction when you're emotionally depleted, and you don't need to. But when stability returns, curiosity often follows. You might notice it subtly. You become impatient with predictability. You want language that surprises you. You want structure that resists you. You want to feel slightly disoriented. That impulse is developmental. It means you're not seeking containment anymore. You're seeking growth. And growth in reading often mirrors growth elsewhere. We don't always choose the book that feels good. Sometimes we choose the book that feels necessary, the one that complicates our thinking, the one that confronts our blind spots, the one that demands attention rather than offering comfort. And that choice tells us something just as important as the comfort read did. It tells us we're ready to expand. Which brings us to the closing question, not diagnostic in a reductive way, but reflective in a useful one. So here's the question I'll leave with you. Think about the last 3 books you chose, not the ones you admire, not the ones you recommend, the ones you actually opened. Were you reaching for relief, recognition, intensity, mastery, belonging? None of those are accidental. Your reading life isn't random. It's responsive, sometimes protective, sometimes aspirational, sometimes quietly courageous. And if you begin to notice the pattern without judgment, your bookshelf becomes less of a performance and more of a conversation. That, I think, is where reading becomes most powerful. Not when it impresses, but when it reflects. If this episode gave language to something you've sensed but never quite articulated, I'd love for you to stay in this conversation. You can subscribe so you don't miss future weekly episodes every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. And if you're also a podcast listener, I release new book reviews every Monday and a longer, in-depth version of my weekly YouTube topics on Thursdays on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If something resonated, share it with someone who might recognize themselves in it. And I'm genuinely interested in this. What do you notice about your own patterns? Leave a comment. I love to read them and I love to receive them. Until next time, thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you next Sunday between the covers.